Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Najmlađi je evropski komesar u povijesti Unije, a njegov resor su okoliš, okeani i ribarenje. Virginius Sinkevičius prije toga bio je zastupnik u parlamentu, a kasnije i ministar gospodarstva Litve. O planovima i preprekama u očuvanju bioraznolikosti govorio je uoči najvećeg svjetskog samita koji se trenutno održava u Montrealu. With us today is the European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, Mr. Virginius Sinkevičius. Welcome to the program of Al Jazeera Balkans.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. We will start right away with the event of the week, which is the COP15 in Montreal. You are going there, and we want to know what are the EU's main priorities and aims at the negotiating table.
So first of all, of course, to have a global agreement, ambitious global agreement, which would include 30 by 30 targets. So it means protection of 30% of global land and 30% of global marine areas, with, of course, very clear review and implementation mechanisms. So certain set of indicators that could be agreed during the COP and to which we would all be able to return and then have an review implementation. So set of indicators that would allow us to check if the countries are doing the progress. So, for example, evaluation of countries' national biodiversity action plans and strategies. Secondly, of course, it's extremely important to ensure not only nature protection, but also nature restoration efforts to be deployed, because we already have to restore what was ruined. And thirdly, I think it's going to be important to agree on the mechanism of funding of different projects. I think what's very important is not to engage into creation of new funds, but rather to ensure that the current funds that are available would be properly working and that the most vulnerable countries would have access to funding.
Okay, we will get back to the funding and finances. I have questions for that later on. But right now, at the start of everything, I would like to ask you to explain to our audience exactly what COP15 is in terms of its importance for biodiversity, and maybe also ask you a question: is COP15 in Montreal this week kind of a landmark for biodiversity as Paris was for climate change?
So it's been often called as a Paris moment for the biodiversity and often referred. Of course, we will know that if when we will have a deal or not. I hope that we will do, and that will be actually a Paris moment. But why it's so important? So first of all, when we speak about the climate change and we talk about the emission, we only saying half of the story. Because without the healthy ecosystems, without our oceans able to absorb the CO2, able to mitigate the climate, without our forests, without peatlands, wetlands, without the soil, we have actually no chances, because 95% of our cultural yields coming from the soil. For the 80% of our crops output responsible are pollinators. So this is all nature ecosystems, which sometimes we, of course, very often, to be honest, we take it as a given. And these ecosystems, they've been declining, and they, of course, putting us humans at a huge risk. So if we want to get it right at 2050 and keep it below 1.5 degrees, emissions is not going to be enough. There won't be technology that can replace forests. There won't be a technology that can replace bees, or there won't be a technology that can replace oceans. So we also have to keep our ecosystems in a good balance.
Okay, we could say then that probably it's like a network of different ecosystems that make up one global one. However, I'm sure that there are places on Earth, there are special regions where the problems with biodiversity are worse than in other places. What are those places?
So of course we have most biodiverse rich areas in the world, One of them, which is probably the most in trouble, is the Amazon forest in Amazon region. And with the huge deforestation rates, we are of course losing lungs of our planet. And this has a huge impact because, again, even in the pharmaceuticals, a lot of the ingredients are still coming from those old forests. As I said, this clears our air. Very often, this is the shelter for different species. At the moment, we already are at the sixth extinction, when 1 million species are at the risk of extinction. And this is all done by us, humans. We pushed the ecosystem to such boundaries. So I would say that now this is one of the hottest issues in the world. Then we have, of course, the parts of the world that suffer from water scarcity, from droughts. We saw what just happened in Pakistan. So very clear that our economic well-being, our health, is very much dependent on the way how the ecosystems can cope with the changes of temperature. And if they are unable to cope, we usually see huge tragedies unfolding.
But how can we then make sure that the voices of those developing countries, those who maybe not have, they do not have the mechanisms such as the EU has or some other developed countries do have, how can we make sure that they are also on the right track and that they can also pick up? Is COP the answer to this?
COP is a good answer because COP is about a level playing field, about additional responsibilities for more developed, and about the finding the ways how to ensure and cover the needs of maybe less developed. They also all countries are represented, all countries are party members, so their of course voice at the table is critical. So we have different mechanisms, we have different groups such as G77, who I think very well represent their interests. But I think what's very clear that those most vulnerable regions, if we're talking about the nature protection efforts there, they cannot deprive local people of the economic growth. So we have to ensure that the funds that they're going to be available, they take into account the local populations, their needs, and ensure that our nature-based solutions, for example, they create opportunities for the people on the ground. Otherwise, it will be extremely difficult to craft a solution not having local populations on board.
Going back to the European Union now, European Union or Europe as a continent has a vast array of very biodiversity and very different species and different plants and everything within the continent. What I want to know is what action is the EU taking on the continent? So and what action are the member states currently taking as well? So not just talking about it, but actual mechanisms and actual policies. Yes.
So I think EU can speak really with a very credible voice, because already in 2020 we have adopted EU Biodiversity Strategy, where our aim is by 2030 to protect 30% of land and 30% of marine territories. We already on land at around 26%, so I'm pretty sure we will implement it. We already see member states submitting additional plans of increasing their protected areas. And then we, at the marine protected areas, we are at around 14. So that will be a bigger challenge for us. So we need to step it up. But we're not going, we're going even beyond than that. We also have a goal of protecting 10% under strict protection, basically almost no-take zones. What's also important, we recently adopted our nature restoration legislation, according to which member states will prepare plans on the set of indicators on nature restoration on their territories. And we're going to have a nature restoration efforts deployed in 20% of the Union's territories. So these are very concrete steps. But I would like to underline one more, that yesterday we reached an agreement on very important legislation as regards our own consumption pattern. So yesterday we reached agreement on curbing the global deforestation and ensuring that the commodities associated with deforested land wouldn't be able to be sold or even imported to the European Union. I think this is a huge step as regards, also our credibility and assurance that our consumption patterns does not drive forest losses, ecosystems losses around the globe.
So we have the policies, we have implementation. How can the European Union encourage its citizens to take greater action in tackling climate change, and through which means can they help? Or maybe better question, what has proven effective so far?
So what citizens like is always, getting together, socialize and plant trees. So we have the initiative of 3 billion trees, of planting 3 billion trees around Europe. I'm very happy that, through the past 15 years, Europe's forest coverage has increased, and it's very much due to the activity of our citizens. So I think, this is the easiest one, the low-hanging one, which from the children to the old one, they all like to do it in the different parts of the world. I've been of Europe. I've been traveling to different member states. I already planted trees, I think, in more than 6 member states, and will continue to do so as long as it's season. So this is the real action, which again, gets the community together, deepens our understanding of the biodiversity, and of course, the real action is being deployed then on the ground.
Okay, and one more question. You mentioned the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. So this is the megalithic document we have in front of us. In what way does the COP15 support your strategy?
So I would say that it's vice versa. Our strategy supports COP15 because our strategy is going to be, very similar to what might be adopted at the COP. So with our ambition, we can show that nature protection efforts, they do not cost you growth, that nature protection efforts can be deployed in different countries, taking into account different ecosystems, managing different types of forests, of peatlands, river basins, and etc. So I think this is going to serve as a very good example for the COP negotiations and proof that this is a good answer, and that with increasing forest coverage, with decreasing pollution, you only have multiple gains.
Energy has been one of the main topics, the hot topic of this year. European Union has put a lot of effort into transforming its energy sources, primarily gas and fossil fuels. Nuclear energy is also on the table again. How do those new prospects align with biodiversity challenges and maybe also your goals, either general or the EU biodiversity strategy?
So, of course, any of the projects can have an impact on biodiversity. But usually the projects are deployed after the environmental impact assessment and only after duly taking into account what impact on environment one or the other project can have. The most importantly, I think that we are speeding up our renewable projects, which are clean projects. So at the end of the day, you can always argue that their deployment has an impact. For example, if it's wind parks in marine areas, that they have an impact on the seabed and marine ecosystem, which we of course measure, and it's very limited one. But it's at the end of the day, when it's operational, it's the clean one. So comparing to the other, let's say, fossil fuel-based energy mix, which is dirty in its operation as well, and increasing emissions, increasing pollution, which has an impact not only on biodiversity and ecosystem, it also has a huge impact on our citizens' health.
Okay, one more question I have. Brussels has directed significant amount of funds to tackle environment threats in the next decade. You also told us in the beginning of the interview that For this topic, there will not be new funds for the moment, but more using the existing ones. However, my question is, how can we ensure that member states actually use the money to fundamentally change certain things and evade greenwashing, which is something European Union is sometimes accused of?
I think, European Union's credibility can be checked with our plans implemented. And I know that when European Union meets the struggle and needs to, address the immediate needs of our citizens, then there is lots of voices saying that, look, you are moving away from the decarbonization. But that's not true. I'm pretty sure in 2030 we will be able to meet our goals. We already see member states speeding up the renewable projects and using their RRF funds. And now returning back to also the COP negotiations, EU is the one who is able to broker the deal. EU is the one who pledged and put on the table double the amount for biodiversity comparing to other countries. I'm very thankful to France and Germany who did similar, but we're still waiting for significant pledges for other countries around the globe. And I'm very happy to engage in a green competition with other countries. I think if there is a green competition, then everyone wins.
Okay, speaking of green competition globally, there are obviously disagreements, either over funding from developed countries, a lack of political will, different interests from certain countries that are perhaps involved in a certain industry, and the intervening role of fossil fuel companies have all been seen as hurdles to finding common agreements on protecting biodiversity. Which hurdles do you expect to have this week at COP15?
I think the biggest will be funding gap. I think the expectations are very high, and sometimes some countries believe that the amount that should be pledged should match the climate ambition. I wish we would be there, but we are still not there on biodiversity, and we have to realize that. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest issue. The rest, I think, can be looked at and can be worked around. The most important is for me not only to have a goal 30 by 30, which is of course already a great step forward, but to ensure that this goal would be implemented in less than 10 years, in 8 years actually. So review mechanism is going to be crucial. Some countries will definitely try to avoid that, but I think it's a shame to return every 10 years, agree on more ambitious goals, and then not to implement them.
I see. Speaking of ambitious goals and big problems, oceans and pollution of oceans, you also mentioned recently seabed pollution. What is being done regarding that? What is being done regarding safekeeping the oceans and our seas?
So, pollution in the ocean, it first of all starts not on the ocean. It starts on the land, and we always have to remember that. So there are a number of measures. I'm happy that finally we are on, let's say, on journey to finalize the global agreements as regards the plastic pollution. I think if we finish it in 2 years, that would be the biggest possible gift to our oceans, because plastic pollution is increasing pressure on our ocean ecosystems. Here in the EU, we just recently presented our new legislation on plastic packaging, which again, by 2040, with the increasing trends of plastic packaging being used, we want to have a decrease of 15%. We are again going after single-use plastic and after packaging, which is absolutely unnecessary. And I hope that it will also serve globally as a prime example.
I was about to ask you, how does this work? I mean, if there is a bloc or a country, for example, European Union, that has a very successful policy, how is there an exchange of knowledge then? Is there a possibility to transfer the ideas and knowledge?
Absolutely, we work with third countries, and we work not only politicians, policymakers, but also businesses among themselves. And waste management is a big issue in many parts of the world, where our know-how, where our technologies are very much valued. I myself next year planning to do a number of circular economy missions, where one of the key areas is going to be a secondary raw materials, ensuring that the materials from the products could be extracted and reused in the economies as long as possible, that we have a working waste management systems and ensure that we prevent waste at the first place, because all the rest of the actions, such as reuse or refurbishment or even recycling, they happen, let's say, post factum. We have to first of all prevent the pollution. That's the only way we can sort of get out of these increasing piles of the waste.
Talking about prevention of pollution, are there certain countries or certain big companies, tech industry, who might be preventing the prevention of pollution, who might be the problem in everything that you or your fellow colleagues around the world are trying to achieve?
I think inevitably some businesses may be, pushing back the change. And of course, fossil fuels industries are the ones most up in arms, because basically this transition means very difficult times or different times for them. And some of them, they are looking for a possibilities for solution, invest into innovation. The others invest into expensive lawyers and try to fight it back. But I think this is going to be more and more difficult to do. And this is not because politicians like me or others who working on climate and biodiversity issues. This is because of what the citizens really want, what they care more and more. We see with every Eurobarometer that citizens deeply care. When citizens have a knowledge, a full information as regards the product environmental footprint, for example, or even the simple thing about how long the product can serve, they will always go for even a bit more maybe expensive option, but the one which has less of an environmental impact, which is going to serve them longer, and etc. So this change already inevitably happening, and I think it will be only broadening.
Speaking of change, you yourself were selected to be the youngest ever EU commissioner at the age of 28, if I'm correct, a few years ago. Being one of the youngest representatives for the European Union, how do you believe that the voices of young activists and future generations can be amplified to ensure they are involved in tackling climate change and protecting biodiversity? I'm sure that the education has a significant part in that.
Absolutely. I think already we have a young generation which is completely different, even comparing to me, even so you refer to my age, but they already know many things and they don't need to learn. They don't need to learn about the different waste streams. They don't need to learn about recycling and managing waste and so on. So I think we have a great future. And I'm very proud to represent Ursula von der Leyen Commission, because in 2019, when we came into office, it seems a long time ago, because we have now Russia's brutal attack against Ukraine, basically war raging in Europe. We have had 2 years of COVID, which again took a lot from young people. And we forgot that there were huge climate strikes every Friday on the streets of most of the cities in Europe. Not only young people, but overall people, of different age, demanding politicians to act on climate, act on biodiversity, to do more as regards the climate ambition. And I'm very happy that the first policy that von der Leyen Commission at that time landed was actually European Green Deal.
Thank you very much for the interview, Mr. Sinkevičius, and good luck at the COP15 in Montreal.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.